Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and on episode 110, I will be reviewing the very, very anticipated Joker Folie Deux, or Joker 2, Joker Extra Crazy with Harley Quinn, whatever it might be subtitled, in your region. There will be a non-spoiler review and a spoiler review. Time codes will be listed in the description, so no need to worry if you haven't had a chance yet to see the movie. And given the box office that this had on opening weekend, you might not have, and I'll tell you if you should see it or not, probably in the spoiler review. And then we will be jumping to question of the week responses and what is this week's question of the week, which you can find out how to respond at the end of the episode. Let's jump into non-spoiler review of Joker Folie Deux.
2 years ago, the name Arthur Fleck hit Gotham like a hurricane.
The trial of the century.
They believe Arthur Fleck to be some kind of martyr. Well, he's not. There's a monster.
Joker Folie Deux is a movie that I think Warner Brothers expected to have a better reaction, which is interesting because obviously the podcast is not as old as the original film, which came out in 2019, which I thought was fine. It was an interesting perspective. It had this air about it that it was a movie that Todd Phillips wanted to make that had nothing to do with the Joker, that was a reflection on 80s New York, but that got wrapped into DC Comics and then won an Oscar for Joaquin Phoenix as his portrayal of Arthur Fleck and this version of Joker. Not the Joker, not a Joker, just Joker. And there was a lot of interesting expectations leading into Joker 2, Folie Deux. Mostly because it was a musical or it wasn't. It was marketed to have music, but it was marketed to not. And it fell into this weird place of this is either going to be brilliant or this is going to be terrible. And unfortunately, Joker Folie Deux is an absolute mess from start to finish. It is all over the place. It is incoherent. And whatever message you think the film is trying to have seems to be lost in what is a disaster of a film, unfortunately. I am somebody who loves musicals. Joaquin Phoenix has been in films where music has been significantly important. His portrayal of Johnny Cash in losing my mind. Walk the Line. Oh my goodness, that was obnoxiously long. And then obviously Lady Gaga recently in the remake of A Star Is Born. Both critically and commercially successful performances. And the two of them together was a really interesting idea. Her playing a version of Harley Quinn, Harleen Quinzel. Harleen Quinzel. Give it a twist and you get Harley Quinn. And this movie, what's most frustrating to me about anything about this at all, and I was bored, which for one is not a good thing when watching a Joker movie, and looking for what could have been subtle symbolism or metaphors or some sort of meaning behind the film, gets lost in the fact that what I was most interested by seems to be completely pushed aside for no apparent reason, which is the dynamics introduced in this film between Harley and Arthur could have been really interesting. A really modern take on Harley, similar to her portrayal in Batman Caped Crusader to some degree. And that dynamic on film would have been unlike anything we've seen from them before. Unfortunately, Harley is a character who's only had one version or interpretation in the DCEU with Suicide Squad and Birds of Prey and the fabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn, and then obviously the Suicide Squad. And I love Margot Robbie's version of Harley Quinn, but that dynamic, particularly with who was cast as the Joker, is the most toxic version of that relationship. And the dynamic introduced in this film, and I'll get more into that into spoilers, was really interesting. And unfortunately, it's not the focus of the film. You'll hear in the clip leading into this that the film is centered around the trial, and a courtroom musical as a pitch for what this movie could have been is something that I would automatically have signed up for. But unfortunately, and it's so interesting to me that this is the case given everybody involved with this film, all of the musical choices don't make any sense. As a fan of musicals growing up, particularly with the Disney Renaissance of musicals, and knowing the power of breaking into song and what that does for your storytelling, each and every time we start a musical sequence, it feels like an emergency brake pulled on a car and almost a knee-jerk reaction to, oh, we're doing music now. And also, which was especially interesting to me, and I say interesting, but I think it was not a great choice, which is both of your leads in this film have very high quality singing skills. They have very pleasant voices. Obviously, Lady Gaga is a massive superstar in the music scene as a recording artist. And a lot of the recordings of the music and the singing in this either was recorded live or chosen to not be spectacular and the best version possible. It really did remind me of the performances in Les Mis, which were recorded live on the stage. And there was a lot of negative reaction to that because a lot of that cast can sing very well. And if you're unaware, typically you record the songs in a recording studio and then just lip sync to the songs pre-recorded on the stage when you're recording the acting portions of the songs. And that was really underwhelming. The film doesn't seem to have a focus. There's been this discussion on whether it's about mental health and our expectations of somebody mentally unwell. And again, I would love if that was the case, and I'm looking for some sort of deep meaning behind this movie. But similar to Joker, and I don't think this was on purpose, it seems to completely lack focus. And as a viewing experience, more than anything, I think that's all right, except for the fact that a wild, zany, incoherent musical is not necessarily, in my eyes, a bad movie. But the biggest crime of this entire experience of all 2 hours and 18 minutes is this movie's boring. It's slow, meanderous with its Joker and Harley Quinn character, which is almost mind-boggling that that's the case. You have one of pop culture's, I'll go as far as to say fiction's, most interesting characters in the last 85 years, who has won 2 Actors Academy Awards. It is obvious, and actors have said this forever, that playing villains is more interesting than it is to play the protagonist or the hero. And somehow, a movie that is already heightened with these 2 characters, Harley Quinn and Joker, added another level of bombastic entertainment with a musical element, and I was bored. This film was it was a methodical drog. That's not even a word, but I felt like I was getting my teeth pulled with each and every one of these sequences, expecting some sort of narrative to be formed or blown away by incredible musical performances, dance sequences of any regard, and it's just a mess. And I'm really curious why this happened. There was this cultural reaction to Joker leading up to it that it was going to be almost an anarchist film where this is going to change things and movies are never going to be the same. And it wasn't that. It was just a movie very influenced by a lot of other movies, specifically Martin Scorsese and what he did specifically with New York culture. And Todd Phillips has said they didn't have any test screenings for this, and it's abundantly clear because this isn't one of those movies where critics loved it and audience hated it, or critics hated it and audience loved it. The reception seems to be pretty much on par, which more than anything, I think helps establish that I don't know who this movie is for. It's really interesting because there's been a lot of conversations about the dichotomy in reception to films recently, where, as I've said, there could be a schism between critics and fans or audience members. And there was a conversation that I read about Pete Docter talking to Miyazaki and what he considers when making films for fans. And he has said that he never does that. He makes the best movie he thinks he can. And then if people love it, they do, or they don't. And obviously he's had mass success with positive reception on both ends of the spectrum. But this movie, I see some positive reception that you just don't get it. And while I respect art is a subjective medium more than anything, movies, comedies, dramas, they all will have positive reception and negative reception to some regard. You would hope you have a majority of that being positive than negative, but I don't think I misunderstand the movie. What seems to be the case, to me at least, is they weren't sure what movie they wanted to make. If this is about society and pop culture's reaction to mental illness, I don't think that's the case, particularly in the world we live in now, where mental wellness and health is so important and the conversations about that are becoming more and more prevalent. If this is supposed to be a reaction to how it was treated back then, maybe, but this version of Joker specifically seems to be inconsistent, and the expectations of what he means to the world are inconsistent. And that to me feels much more disingenuous because of the fact of where he's left at the end of the movie. This movie essentially has two endings, and neither are necessarily gratifying because they both happen. If they chose a lane and picked one over the other instead of including both, I think the movie is better for that. But because it is all over the place, tries to do multiple things, I commend the effort, but the succinct vision for what this could be is really at a loss, and I have a really hard time trying to figure out what it was supposed to be doing. And to me, that's ultimately super disappointing because you had this cultural swell of an R-rated Joker movie that grossed over $1 billion because of a lot of the hype going into that. And the expectation that, oh, this is going to be some sort of counterculture movie, a musical that's going to push the envelope. And whether that was a reaction based on the first film and being directed into this film, Todd Phillips himself saying that this isn't a musical, but by every measurable feature, it is. Characters break into song, and whether that be inside the characters' heads or not, it is sort of a rule that if a character is breaking into song because they cannot use dialogue or regular spoken words to express how they're feeling, that is the case. And this film's choice of music doesn't help push the narrative. It doesn't help explain what's going on. It seems to be a real whiplash of an effect when each and every one of these songs is happening. The choice of color in this is interesting when we get to use it or not. And what I was most disappointed by, as I've said, was Harley Quinn's inclusion in this could have been really interesting and an amazing exploration of the relationships of those two characters. But I think she's underutilized, which is, again, a real disappointment because there is something in this movie. But ultimately, and I've said that a bunch, but at the end of the day, or ultimately, as I've said multiple times, this film feels like it's doing way too many things all at once. And the fact that that is an unpleasant experience is not necessarily a bad thing, but I really don't think that was the goal. This film is wildly incoherent. It's a mess. It's, as I've said, it's boring. I think everybody in the film is giving 100%. None of the performances feel phoned in. But man, is it weird that a Joker musical is boring. I can explain more of this in spoilers, so I think I have described all of the reasons in non-spoilers as to why I didn't enjoy it. So let's dive into some further detail and get into the spoiler aspects of this film and why I don't think it works.
They're sending me home.
Why?
They're saying you're a bad influence on me.
All right, so as I said in non-spoilers, the film centers around Arthur Fleck's trial and his limited relationship that he has with Harley Quinn. The film opens with an animated sequence all about Joker being the shadow of Arthur Fleck, and again, that symbolism could be really interesting if we explore the relationship that Arthur has with being the Joker. Is it a case of multiple personality syndrome? And the film explores Arthur's relationship with being the Joker, but it is ultimately not a case of multiple personality syndrome as it was labeled back in the 1980s. It's now, I believe, called dissociative syndrome. And we meet Harley Quinn, or Lee Quinzel, in the Arkham State Hospital, and their relationship, as I've mentioned, we're in full spoilers, is really interesting. We learn that Harley is the psychologist we know her to be. She grew up in the white collar or the well-to-do areas of Gotham, and that she has become obsessed with Arthur Fleck and Joker specifically, and has checked herself in to build this relationship. Already from the get-go, if you're just following me with this part, that's really interesting. This is not a character who has been wooed or seduced by the Clown Prince of Crime. She's chosen this relationship because of the things she's seen, what Joker has meant for Gotham society, this symbol that Arthur Fleck has become. However, we're going to completely undercut that relationship because she has no interest in Arthur. It's just she's obsessed with the Joker, and she wants to bring Joker out of him, which is great, except for by the end of the film, this relationship comes to nothing and Arthur is killed at the end. We're in full spoilers, which is part of the problem with the film, where we get to see this relationship go back and forth, and having a proactive Harley Quinn is something that I'm really looking forward to seeing in Batman Caped Crusader. But the minimal use of it, unfortunately, leaves it to be slightly underwhelming. We don't get enough of Harley or Lee in this film. She dresses up as Harley Quinn for the final aspect, or the final part of the court trial. What are they? Oh my goodness. They are called the closing statements. And when this happens, it's great you see her. And when we learn that Arthur has always been Joker, that again is a decent enough reveal where no, Joker is Arthur and Arthur is Joker. They're not separate from each other. They're all in the same. You would think the film would then have him be either Joker's no longer gone, I've actually been cured, or I'm being completely overwhelmed by this negative part of my personality. It's no longer a different one, but it is who I'm going to be. And as I've said, all of the musical sequences in the film are not crazy. They are underwhelming. They're boring. They are used for shock, but not in a way where it's like, oh my God, what's happening? There is one moment that later on has foreshadowing to Arthur's demise at the end of the film, but the relationship doesn't reach the levels of the toxicity of anything we've seen from before. Arthur is, of course, hurt when he learns she's using him to get the attention and be the Joker, and it's something that Arthur uses during his trial. He is originally being represented by a lawyer who's trying to show that he is criminally insane and that he should be seeking positive treatment, not being put away with all of the other criminals of Gotham. And then eventually he fires her and decides to be the Joker, which at this point you would suspect is when we break into a full-blown musical. Joker's in court. You have the judge, of course, saying he doesn't want this to be a circus. Obviously, the jokes about clowns there are there for you. But the film never elevates past this point. It just sort of meanders for the rest of the film. And when I discuss the two endings of the movie, one, we have all of these anarchists that we've learned continued to follow Joker in the 2 years following the events of the first film. There was a TV movie made about him, are in the court, particularly ramped up because Arthur is now the Joker, representing himself. And as the trial is coming to a close and we are hearing the verdicts, the courthouse is blown up, and Joker/Arthur is saved by followers of his Joker. They never say the Joker. It's just Joker, which I think, again, should have some sort of meaning if he is the inspiration behind the Joker, but the film doesn't do that. It's a mess. And he is broken out, and he eventually goes to see Harley, or Lee, who has actually been living in the apartment building we saw Arthur living in the first film, and he's pronounces his love to her, but even though we've seen her fully Harley'd, she's cut her hair, which again is in one sequence of the film, she says, well, you're not actually Joker, you're Arthur. You were just putting it on, and you're not the person I want to be with. I wanted to be with the Joker. If that's the ending of the movie, I actually think that is a natural conclusion to Arthur's story, which is, no, the Joker was just this mask that he put on metaphorically and literally, of course, with actual face paint to present into the world to save himself from the horrible world he was living in. But no, Arthur has to get arrested again, brought back to Arkham, where he is eventually killed by another inmate who kills themselves or cuts their own face, which is thankfully not shown because, as you know, I'm a squeamish person. That would have been absolutely disgusting. So the ending of the movie just seems to be undecided with what it is trying to say, which is really disappointing because, as I said in non-spoilers, there are elements of this movie that I did quite enjoy, the concepts, but there are enough concepts to make an interesting movie. There are pieces of this that would have made for an interesting musical, but all of the musical sequences are super, muddled or toned down. You're making a movie about the Joker and a musical Joker movie with Harley. It should be balls to the wall insanity, and it is that, but on the worst end of the spectrum, where it just seems like incoherentness as opposed to in-your-face, bombastic, look how wild and crazy this movie is. And I said in non-spoilers that I thought Lady Gaga was underutilized because if the focus of the film is that relationship, I don't feel like we spend enough time with her to really get to see this modern portrayal of Harley. It is an element, of course, as I said, that's sort of teased specifically in Batman Caped Crusader, and is a very distinct separation from the version we've seen from before, which is Joker just gaslighting Harley at every single moment that he can in the animated series, in the DCEU. Obviously, she does break free and do her own thing. And then I know there's probably some people screaming in their headphones about Harley Quinn's TV show, which is a whole other thing, specifically with her relationship with Poison Ivy and how that's been portrayed in other media and whatnot. But you have Lady Gaga, and she doesn't have an incredible song in the film, which again, a lot of these decisions to me just seemed very perplexing, where I can't find the reasoning behind the choice. More than anything, that's truly disappointing, because even though I wasn't expecting to be blown away by this movie, given how I didn't love the first one, I thought the idea of making this a musical was interesting. On top of having Harley Quinn be it, it's Joker's most important relationship outside of his one with Batman. But we have relationships that don't really have conclusions also, which is Arthur's relationships with the prison guards of Arkham, where we have Brandon Gleeson, who's like the main guard of Arkham, and they have this quid pro quo relationship where Arthur tells jokes and he's given cigarettes, and that relationship is tested as Arthur becomes Joker, thinking this is going to save him from the brutality of Arkham Asylum or Arkham State Hospital, and obviously it doesn't. But there is no true retribution from the guards because he makes fun of them during the court case. He's assaulted once, and it's a very unpleasant scene in the film. Well, I mean, most of the film is unpleasant, unfortunately. But after Arthur is found guilty, escapes, and then goes back, everything seems to sort of be at status quo, which kind of reminded me of a Simpsons episode, and not in a good way, where if this is supposed to be some sort of counter-programming, where expectations are you're going to do something different, and again, I understand that's expectations being brought into the movie, but doing something really conventional is the least interesting choice. And given how they didn't do that with the last one, I'm at a loss for what this is trying to do. And unfortunately, it's not a film I would recommend. It's not going to be financially viable based on its opening weekend. There are a lot of other movies that are going to be in theaters or have been released already. And as I said last week, my current favorite movie of the year is The Wild Robot. So I really think you should probably see that instead. So that will do it for my Joker Folie et Deux review. Let's move into last week's question of the week responses and this week's question of the week responses.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, what movies make you cry? You can email the podcast, filmreelistpod@gmail.com, or you can comment on the social media post at any point, or just message me with hashtag question of the week, and I will read it. So Dylan Pollock of Movies to Watch Before You Die writes in, yes, Kyle, I have also never gotten the Lord of the Rings hype. As far as the movies that make me emotional or cry, as I've gotten older, the answer is a lot. Still, Coco made me cry in the theater. Click made me cry when I watched it at home. Hearing Sandler talk about family coming first. There's so many more to I remember the namesake did specifically. I'm sure there are many more I'm forgetting. Oh, and The Notebook did, which I'm still shameful about, but God damn it, if the ending with the older couples doesn't get me so hard. Okay. Scotty Cameron wrote in on YouTube. Dylan raised a good question. For me, the big franchise that never connected with me is the Godzilla franchise. Granted, I've only seen the Roland Emmerich movie from 1998 and the Gareth Edwards film from 2014. I think both aren't very good films at all, so I'm never really interested in the franchise. I guess it's like having your only exposure to the Transformers franchise be the Michael Bay films and just seeing John Turturro get peed on by a Transformer. Then the next film, he's under the Transformers wrecking balls. And who can forget the bit about the Romeo and Juliet laws, just thinking about what that franchise is all about. Not knowing there are so many more better outings for the Transformer franchise, like Bumblebee, the Marvel/Sunbow cartoon, Transformers Prime, and Transformers Animated, which was a straight-to-TV movie pilot. I'm in the similar situation with the Godzilla franchise, where I've heard there have been so many better Godzilla movies than the Roland Emmerich film and the Legendary Pictures Monsterverse. I just haven't been interested in them because they left such a bad taste in my mouth. Pacific Rim is the better version of any American Godzilla's movies, but by at least not being bogged down with techno-babble nonsense and actually coming up with creative things to do with kaijus and mechs. So I've answered Kyle's question on Spotify and Dylan's on YouTube. Scotty's answer on Spotify was a movie that makes me cry is Logan. It is a satisfying yet tragic ending to Wolverine's story. Keen Machine wrote in The Land Before Time, and Gab, Dylan's host on Movies to Watch Before You Die, said everything makes me cry. Thanks so much to everybody for submitting their answers to Question of the Week. This week's Question of the Week is simple. Who is your favorite Joker across video games, live action portrayals, TV or movies, and cartoons? I know there's going to be some popular ones, but I'm really curious if there's a schism potentially based on age. So as I said at the beginning of Question of the Week, you can let me know on all the social medias. Linktree is posted in the episode description, or email me, filmrealistpod@gmail.com. Now, before ending this week's episode, I wanted to talk about a show I finally watched. It's been one that has been suggested to me for a while, and I now understand why, and I've been telling some of my friends about it, that I finally watched it, and that is Has Been Hotel from, let's see, I don't want to get her name wrong because I wasn't necessarily a fan of the YouTube stuff. Not that I didn't enjoy it, I just never watched it. So it was created by Vivian Madrano. It's a phenomenal Amazon Prime show that is all about Lucifer Morningstar's daughter, Charlie Morningstar, creating this hotel designed to rehabilitate demons or human souls in hell to prevent overpopulation and have them sent back to heaven. While that doesn't sound necessarily interesting to some, I would disagree. The concept for this to me was really compelling, given how I was raised Roman Catholic. I would describe myself as agnostic now, but the whole idea of playing with Christianity's history and stories, I really like, particularly giving us a setting of hell which can be as debaucherous as you could possibly imagine. On top of that, having all of this incredible music, every single one of the cast is somebody with a proven musical track record, whether that's on Broadway or in film or TV. It's absolutely incredible. It's been a soundtrack that I have not been able to stop listening to as of late. I wouldn't be surprised if it winds up being one of my most listened to things of the year. I really enjoy it. I'm glad I caught it late because it means my wait for season 2 probably won't be as long. The show has been renewed already for seasons 2, 3, and 4. And in a world of so many remakes and sequels, this is a new original take. I'm probably going to start Hell of a Boss, which is Vivian's other show, which is exclusively on YouTube because it does take place in the same universe in her version of Hell. And given where season 1 ends, I'm super excited for season 2. So there's just a little insight into what I've been watching lately. There's going to be a lot of stuff probably coming up in the next couple weeks that I'm going to mention. Oh, also, I have started Legend of Vox Machina Season 3. If you're a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, just the franchise or intellectual property at all, and haven't watched any of Critical Role, which I didn't, I absolutely love this show. If you watched Honor Among Thieves and need more Dungeons & Dragons, and for some reason you haven't watched Critical Role or Legend of Vox Machina, I thought the 3 episodes we got for the start of Season 3 were a really great almost movie of where we're going and sets up all these characters in really interesting and compelling ways. And again, I'm so glad that we have a fantasy or science fiction show that is adult because I like having a wide variety in these genres, and animation is an incredible art form, which I hope continues to be used in this way. So that will do it for What's Kyle Been Watching. Other than that, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. It does help the show grow, and I would love to reach more listeners. If you think they'd enjoy the ramblings of one specific person, that of course being me with the occasional guest, that would be absolutely amazing. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I hope to see you next time, which will be a review of Saturday Night. We'll see you next time.